So it's wonderful to be here with you today, Julian. Look, you know that I've long admired and rated your work as a researcher, a teacher, a leader in business schools, and a person, a human being, somebody who has pioneered a lot of thinking and practice on innovation, strategy, disruption, transformation, and the great spirit that you do it with, and a very, very generous spirit too. And you and I have written an article together, which I'm very much enjoyed, and I've lectured in front of your students. And this time, most recently, your newest book out of many, you've teamed up with John Fallon, the former CEO of Pearson, amongst many other roles, with the help of Adam Buzzlemate, to consider how established organizations can fight back and thrive in an age of digital transformation, how they can be resurgent, the name of your book. And before we delve into that and all the other topics around it, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, David. Great to reconnect with you.
Fantastic. Look, I know you love challenging conventional wisdom and taking an alternative take, which I know is something you've done for years, if not decades. Digital transformation, many people go, oh, I know all about that, and
right.
Or they roll their eyes. But I was curious how this book came about and what you and John were trying to achieve by it. Let's start there.
Yeah, so the conventional wisdom I wanted to challenge was indeed that digital transformation is a story of the Googles and the Netflixes and the Facebooks sort of taking over the world and characterizing essentially traditional established companies as dinosaurs. And I put together some data to prove that it's actually a much more nuanced story than that. I mean, I'll share with your listeners, with your viewers, the little statistic which I start the book with, which is the Fortune 500 companies. There are 500 companies on that list. Guess how many of them, I will ask my audience, did not exist before 1995, 1995 being the year that the internet took off. And most people will guess there must be 100 or 200 of them. And in fact, there's only 27. And these are indeed the companies that are in the news all the time: Netflix, Tesla, Google, Facebook, you name it. And that's a big eye opener because people have got so kind of sort of into the narrative of digital giants are killing off established companies. They kind of forget that most of the economy, literally most of the economy, is made up of not just of big established companies plodding on, but some of them actually doing a remarkably good job of becoming better and indeed very, very successful in the digital world. So my starting point for the book was that article, which actually came out in Harvard Business Review.
Yes.
When I met John, he was actually, from a very different perspective, coming at the exact same issue. And he, as chief executive of Pearson, and most people will know a little bit about Pearson, the biggest educational publisher in the world, as a company which has gone through this horribly painful digital transformation where people used to buy textbooks and they now buy essentially digital texts.
Mm-hmm.
And in order to manage that transition, he had to sell off, among other things, the Financial Times and The Economist, which were businesses that they had owned before. He went through this gut-wrenching change, and he had found common cause with a bunch of other chief executives in trying to figure out what it was that he and his ilk and his sort of peers could do to revitalize themselves in the light of the digital revolution.
Yes.
And of course, they figured out, as I think we all see nowadays, that they had these enormous assets which are not going away. And that if you're smart about it, you can actually use those assets to continue to, not just survive, but indeed thrive. And so that we came at the same issue of big established companies reinventing themselves from two different angles. And that was the genesis for the book.
That's fantastic. What a great synopsis, but still read the book. There's plenty more in it. I mean, I knew Pearson. I worked with him for a bit, and John came under a huge amount of pressure externally and obviously internally. And I was struck with the nuances, of course, with what really happened, and the fact there was a number of telling sentences where he talked about how he knew that his legacy obviously would, and his impact would be after he would leave in terms of his tenure. And so it really told me a lot of things. But one was, the stories that you might read about at sort of surface level, there's a lot more to them, and you need to do your homework and really interrogate not only the disruptive challenges, but the strengths and the assets of these organizations.
And there's a really important point there, which is it was clear to everybody that the student's textbook was at some point going to digitize, because obviously, novels had been digitized, music, movies, but no one could tell you when it was going to happen. And it was very
Yes.
clear that, as an incumbent, he wasn't in a hurry to make that change, because obviously he knew that the new business model would be less profitable than the old one. But he also knew that it was bound to happen because of the forces out there. And so a lot about his time at the top was essentially preparing the company for this inevitability, and then at some point making that difficult decision that they're not going to publish in paper a new version of this particular text. And so that is, as you say, that is something that ultimately he wasn't thanked for at the time, because the share price of Pearson did indeed drop during his tenure. But he put in place a lot of the changes which the subsequent chief executives have now benefited from, because he did do a lot of right sizing, a lot of sorting out of difficulty. So that's difficult. You inherit the situation of the time, and you've got to make the best of that. Don't necessarily expect everything that you do to be kind of paid off in the time when you're actually running the show.
And if you look at not only John, but the other CEOs you've known, worked with, there are, whether it is listed company in particular with, shareholders, investors, looking at their quarterly results, they're under huge amounts of pressure.
Yeah, exactly.
And yet they have to manage the here and now and the future, as you just described. Exactly. How can they tell that story in a way where people go, I get the challenges, but I want you to, keep your margins at a healthy level and keep growing. How do they do that?
I mean, it's really, of course, it's difficult. It goes without saying. And indeed, one of the people we interviewed for the book, his name's Patrick Wellington. He's an analyst, very, very experienced analyst in that sector. And then of course he says, the analyst community are always looking to sort of see the worst case scenario and play it out, and to understand what it could possibly do. And so, as the chief executive, you have to manage the here and now. And, you are not, it's not fair to your, in his case, tens of thousands of employees. It's just to say, it's going to be kind of complex and messy. You've got to try to create some clarity around the message for today, whilst also painting this picture of an uncertain future, which by definition is unknowable. And to have in mind that unless you can articulate some sort of view about how our organization is going to find its way through to this, digital world, then your analysts are going to be very, very skeptical, and they will punish you. And so you're always, we call this ambidexterity, I guess. We're always managing the here and now, as well as trying to kind of fix the plane, as it were, try to figure out what the next future looks like. And that's ultimately, that's the essence of leadership, is being able to manage those two very different things at the same time.
Incredibly grueling and demanding. You talk and call out how transformation is much more than technology, and you called out some of it there. And there's the overall identity of the organization, what it becomes. There's the structure, the building blocks, capabilities, of course, mindsets, and you need all of that, of course, beautiful combination. But if I had to be cheeky and say there's only one that you had to call out is the most challenging for organizations to get right, or leaders particularly to get right, what would you focus on?
I'm gonna assuming that this is established companies who've been around for decades, who have a very well-entrenched set of ways of working, to try to infuse a digital mindset or culture across the organization is perhaps the biggest opportunity or challenge. And the reason I say that, of course, is that even a chief executive like John has to bring his organization with him. I mean, yes, there are things he can do. I mean, the decision to sell the Financial Times to Nikkei, that was a small group of people under his direct control who made that decision, right? But if you're trying to gear up the entire, editorial publishing apparatus around, turning the traditional paper-based textbook into a digital thing, thousands and thousands of people have to be part of that. And of course, they know the details much better than you do. They are seeing the signals in the market that people aren't buying your book anymore, or that there's a growing second-hand market through Amazon marketplaces for your texts. Those are the signals that they can either ignore or bring to your attention. And if they got that digital mindset, they're attuned to the things that are happening in the world, then they're much more likely to actually act on those signals. So yeah, decentralization of thinking as well as of action is what I'm talking about, a digital mindset.
And often you need to bring in new people.
Yeah.
So whether it's through partnerships, alliances, acquisitions, and I guess genuinely empower people and teach them how to think and make decisions, especially I've worked in and worked for many, many large bureaucratic organizations, and frankly, people are focused on doing, and the thinking part has been taken away from them because it's so tightly managed. So there's often a degree of confidence that people need to have in order to start thinking again. The other thing, I was struck with so many different angles to this topic when I was reading the book, and I read it page by page, sentence to sentence. You talk about, fast second, not leaping forward, but being deliberate and learning. Tell us a bit more about that, because people, I'm not sure, will think, oh no, come on, we need to win the race.
Exactly. So, and we've got to attribute the phrase "fast second" to our mutual friend Costas Markides, because he wrote an entire book on that subject. So everyone thinks they want to be a first mover, right? And it's, as you say, they want to win the race. We've got to get to market first. And that's such an alluring narrative for any chief executive to put forward. But, I'll then ask them, was Amazon the first online book publisher? Was Facebook the first social network? Was Google the first search engine? No. I mean, it's very hard actually to find genuine first movers who have actually made it to long-term success. And that's in the startup world. I mean, in the established world, it's even more extreme, which is that, those of us who work in established companies are sitting on, a bunch of really successful businesses, assets, capabilities. We want to be wary of what's happening. We have to be, alert to the changes that are underway. But for every change that is fundamentally disruptive, or every new technology that's fundamentally disruptive, I would wager there's another 10 which actually are not completely disruptive. And I'll just go to my own industry. There was a time 8 or 10 years ago when we thought, oh my gosh, online learning is going to disrupt education. And of course, lots of well-funded ed tech startups came along. Most of them have gone bankrupt. Some of them are hanging on. We even went through COVID, where we figured out that actually we had to do online learning. And of course, you know what happened. We all know what happened. We all reverted back, when we were allowed to face-to-face learning. So I say we all did. There is still a significant segment of the market whereby online learning is valuable, but no one thinks it's better than in person. And the segmentation is actually exactly to the point, which is, as a company looking at a new technology or an emerging business model, it's tempting to say, we've got to get there first. My view is, be thoughtful about what that opportunity actually looks like. It probably isn't disruptive. It might have an impact, but do not throw huge amounts of money at this thing yet. Wait until you actually know that you're on a trajectory where it is appropriate. Now, I mean, timing is everything in business. I do get it. But we sometimes talk about the company that missed the boat, Nokia or Kodak or whatever. We sometimes forget about the ones that threw hundreds of millions, billions at technologies before they were ready. The classic case, of course, is Time Warner, which, if you remember, merged with AOL.
Yes.
Now, because it was a merger, the costs are disguised. But essentially, they created that almost as a merger of equals, whereas, in fact, AOL was really worth about a tenth of what Time Warner was worth. So Time Warner shareholders lost their shirt on that merger, because Time Warner made this crazy bet back in 1999 or whatever it was, that their future was to merge with an online provider. So it's so easy to forget just how damaging it can be to move early as well as to move late.
Yes, that's a great example. Just imagine a situation now where you're speaking with a new CEO, has read the book, is listening to this podcast, and they're in their first 10 days, 100 days, that time of framing, and they know they need to change in some shape or form. Two things. One is, what would be the biggest mistake they should avoid doing or being? And secondly, what would be the most counterintuitive thing they should try to do during that period?
Yeah. I mean, I do believe they should avoid acting fast. I mean, anything I say is going to have some caveats around it, because sometimes when a new executive takes charge, there's a couple of little quick fixes that they can immediately see that they want to make, and in that honeymoon period, sometimes there's a license just to do that. But if we're talking about the sort of fundamental changes to the business or the business model because of some emerging threat or technology, I really do urge caution. Take the time to think it through. Take the time to bring the necessary people along on a conversation to map out what that future looks like. And then, of course, depending on the magnitude of the threat, sometimes you have to then act decisively, but sometimes actually, it's completely fine to act incrementally. I mean, we all know this logic that if you are facing a disruptive threat, you create a separate business unit off to the side. The classic case in the book, which any British listener will remember, is Auto Trader, the magazine that I would read as a kid, looking at new cars to buy. They went online, and they went online very, very efficiently, private equity backed. So they were very disciplined about it. And they moved from being, paper to digital, and maintained leadership throughout. That was by creating a completely separate unit to the side. I only advocate for that if you really are sure that this thing is so disruptive that you can't handle it within. My big preference is always to try to manage these things within. And in some ways, that's what we'll get to it later. Maybe I'm doing within my own institution in terms of handling generative AI and what its effect on learning is going to be. So that's my first answer: is caution and bringing people with you. Your second question was about what's your counterintuitive.
Yeah, what would be the move they should? So that's about avoiding something. What could they positively do that actually is not in the typical traditional 100-day playbook that your research, your book would tell them to consider?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I don't have a brilliant answer, but I do think that symbolism matters here in terms of, is there something that you can do that shows that you're serious about this opportunity, shows that you are actually offering a vision of what might be, but in a way that's not expensive.
Yes,
and that's the trick. And I am going to give you an example from my new world, just to make sure people can see what I'm talking about. Is generative AI going to reshape business school learning? I mean, yes. I mean, in some ways, it's going to reshape it for sure. Is it going to disruptive? That's a separate question. Probably not. So, one of the things I did, within 3 months of arriving was I set a team, and I say a team, I mean, 3 master's students. I mean, total cost of around $50,000, right? But I set them to work to create a little generative AI product to use in combination with case studies as a way of using Gen AI to help students to read the case studies better rather than to shortcut the reading of the case studies.
Yes.
And who knows, it might die. It doesn't really matter. The point is, when challenged by my board and my boss, what are you doing about this? I mean, the short answer is, we are working very hard to think about what it's going to do to our core. But I can also point to this one little thing off the side. No one knows how big or small it is. That just shows we're bringing a bit of creativity to bear on the challenge. So I think there are relatively low cost ways of doing exciting things, which obviously make much more noise than perhaps they deserve. But
that reminds me of the example of David Pemsel in The Guardian, who, when he was first in role, he invited some of his most disruptive people to challenge the most limiting assumptions in the business, and sort of radical sort of thinking. Let's continue on that theme then in your role as Dean of Ivey. I mean, I'm curious, given you've obviously played various roles in London Business School too, so you've been in business schools as well as being a professor within them. What has that taught you about the thinking and the practice of strategy as a topic, as a whole, that in a way you might not have learned without playing that professional role?
No, it's good. It's a great question, because I spent a lifetime lecturing about strategy and indeed consulting, as have you to an even greater degree, lecturing or advising companies on their strategy, putting in place a strategy for Ivey Business School. That was my project of the first year, and we launched in May this year. We called it our Bold Ambition. I was conscious in putting that together that, first of all, it's hard. It goes without saying that it's hard because you're trying to carve out a story that is both, doable. It's something which actually we can potentially achieve, but is also to some degree distinctive or unique. And business schools, I would say, even more than many other industries, we've got the problem that we all do exactly the same thing. We all basically bring in, undergrad, masters, executives. We teach them about business, and we hope that they do a good job. And we all cover the same territory of business. So I was hyper conscious that anything I came up with, someone would say, well, that's pretty obvious. Any business school could have done that. And so we had to work just super hard on finding an angle which was genuinely Ivey specific. Now, your listeners won't necessarily know this, but Ivey is actually the biggest publisher of case studies in the world. Harvard is the biggest seller of case studies. We're the biggest publisher. So that was one thing I knew we had going for us, which gave me a little kernel of kind of uniqueness to build around. So the lesson for me is, you've got to take people with you, but at some point you've also got to make some decisions yourself, and getting that timing right is challenging. And then you've got to work doubly or trebly hard on this point about uniqueness, because it is so hard to genuinely have a point of view that not just you yourself figure out is distinctive, but the rest of the world sees as distinctive.
Continuing on that theme, if you had a wish list and you could create a separate unit or a greenfield site for the business, imagine that, and then you could reverse engineer the business school into it, what would you love to be focusing on? Where do you think the most lucrative and most impactful opportunities are?
That's a great question. Because that asks the underlying question about what is the thing that's holding you back? What is the inertia that's holding you back, right? And it's basically that, and we are no different to any other business school in this, is that we are constrained by our institutional system, meaning the tenure system, the program regulation system, the government rules about how we create degrees. All of those things slow down the process of innovation in business schools. On the other hand, the things that our students value, which is why we're not going to be disrupted, is people still care about getting degrees. People still care about the network that they build by coming to a place like Ivey. Our recruiters love the fact that we are absolutely kind of filtering out, all the applicants we don't like and finding the best people to make their job easier, hiring them. So the unit I want to create preserves all of those benefits. It's still the Ivey Business School. It's still an MBA from Ivey, but it's done in a way that is freed from all of those institutional constraints. I'll just be very, very specific, and this is partly me speaking about London Business School as much as Ivey, is the courses that we teach are defined by the structure of the area groups, the functional structure of the faculty, which was typically invented 50 years ago. And this is a bit overstating it, but essentially, the students are learning things. The topics the students learn are based on, an organizational structure that was created 50 years ago. And that's insane. And we all know it's insane. And yet when you've got, 100 tenured professors who all identify as, I'm a finance professor or I'm a marketing professor, it's very hard to persuade them that they don't need to teach finance or marketing anymore. You can't persuade them. It's just impossible. And if you were starting a business from scratch, yes, you'd probably teach a bit of all of these things, but you would probably emphasize much more a bunch of stuff that is not baked into the functional structure of the business school.
You mentioned tenure there. I know it's a very delicate topic,
but
I have to cover it. In an environment where competition for talent, for funding and everything is very intense, performance management is an integral part of high-performing organizations. How resilient do you think tenure will be in the future, i.e.,
Yeah,
how long can it last?
yeah.
I know that's not a new
It's last.
topic, but I've never had the opportunity to ask you.
Yeah, look, it's going to endure for as long as for my career for sure. I mean, you can never say never, but the trouble is that the forces of inertia are very strong on this. No one will willingly give up tenure. Donald Trump is doing his best to challenge the way that universities in the US are working, and he's only ever going to be partially successful on that. And I hope he won't be. No, the solution here, not the solution here. The path forward is actually quite clear, which is not one I'm happy about, but it is the way that it's going to almost inevitably play out. Is that the tenure itself won't disappear, but the number of people who are on the tenured track as a percentage of the number of people teaching will go down. And
Right.
you're already seeing that happening, which is that a business school like mine, the tenure track people are earning 3 or 4 times more than the sort of sessional teachers, the people who are brought in just to teach. And so as university funding gets squeezed, and as the tenured professor refuse to retire because they don't have to retire and they enjoy their comfortable life, the only lever I have as a dean is essentially to change the faculty mix. And gradually the number of people who are on tenured appointments will shrink as a percentage of the total. And what I do is I bring in a bunch of adjunct or sessional teachers who are often brilliant teachers, who are often better in the classroom than the research-oriented faculty. And they cover the teaching. And then what I hope is I've still got enough research-oriented faculty left in my tenure track side to continue to build up the credibility of the institution. Because in the long term, the most successful universities and the most successful business schools by prestige means are actually the ones that have the best research reputation. So I'm not denying that for a second. I'm just saying the pragmatic view of any dean is I can't afford to hire any more of these people because they're expensive and they're not willing to change. Therefore, I'm going to hire different people.
And in a nutshell, how do you inspire the tenured professors to keep performing at their absolute best, which may be researching the most distinctive original topics, sharing it and so forth? Because in any large incumbent organization, or any incumbent organization, I should say, there comes a time in people's careers, sometimes 10 years in, 20 years in, where you reach a plateau, you actually go down the other side, and the lever you have, which sounds crude, which would be, okay, thank you, you've made your contribution, move on, isn't available to you. How do you, as dean, inspire them to have a cohort of high-performing tenured professors?
Yeah, I mean, I only have 3 levers there, given that I can't fire them. One lever is I can figure out what the one thing that they care about is and continue, or 2 things, and to continue to sort of push them to be even better in that area and accept the fact that they're not going to be rounded. Another thing I have is I have access to discretionary resources around shares and discretionary funding for extra research money and research institutes. So I can absolutely take money that is mine to control and put it towards certain types of activities, and some people will follow the money, and not all, but some will. And then the third is essentially peer review, peer support. One thing that London Business School did very well was that even though faculty were de facto tenured and didn't really have to be reviewed, every few years they would go up for a peer review, whereby all of their colleagues essentially weighed in on how good is this going to be. And of course, a lot of people respond quite well to peer.
Yes, I can see that.
Peer support, peer criticism. So yeah, there are mechanisms at my disposal. Most businesses, of course, they've got a little bit more discretion over easing people out, giving them generous payoffs and ultimately in some cases just sacking them. But those are not things I can play with.
Well, I love the clarity of, again, what you have and how you can use them. Let's just focus a little bit more about you in terms of how you practice what you preach in your life. And thinking about a typical week now, obviously you're in a new role. What are the most pivotal moments during a typical week where you can create leverage, where you can be very strategic about the choices you make, about your time, your attention, your energy? What would they be? Just give us a flavor.
Yeah. So this is a very, very good question, because I spend a lot of time in catch-ups, a lot of time on ceremonial stuff, a lot of time meeting people for the first time. Where I've got some leverage, obviously there are decision-making meetings. I mean, it goes without saying that there is a management committee, we call it, a team of people around me, and we do, allocate our admittedly lean resources, towards certain projects and not others. Another is fundraising is an increasingly important part of my job, as you would expect. 30-40% of my time is spent meeting prospective donors, and of course, when you've got really generous donors, they genuinely move the needle in terms of
Yes.
And then the third thing I'll say is perhaps the surprising one or not, but I need to carve out the time to ensure that I don't get my diary swamped by all of that stuff, so that I can say, here is something I'm going to do, which perhaps my predecessor didn't do, or some people wouldn't make time for, because I think it signals that this is important.
Yes,
so,
that
I
signaling is so
started,
important.
just like you, I started a podcast series, really just within the first month. And that is me interviewing some of our less well-known professors to give their research a voice, so that we can then, share that across the community. I mentioned, finding time for a little, computer science project on, essentially trying to use generative AI to change teaching. And a third example is I'm actually carving out time to co-teach a new course this coming fall, which my predecessors wouldn't have done, as a signal that I'm trying to actually take seriously rethinking how teaching happens. The best way to rethink how teaching happens in a generative AI world is to try out some of those innovative new techniques myself. And that obviously sends a huge signal internally.
I agree. I think the people around you like the fact that you're there, present, trying things out, learning at the same time as them. I think that's incredibly empowering and inspirational. Let's just dig a bit deeper. What about your superpower? What's your biggest superpower as a person?
I mean, I didn't know this, but enough people have told me that I just have to assume that that's true. Is I am incredibly efficient at multitasking. I don't know. It's not something I specifically nurtured, but I juggle a lot of balls or spin a lot of wheels or whatever the metaphor you like, and I do work pretty hard, but it does feel that I'm able to actually keep those balls in the air more efficiently than most people. It does, and what that means is that a lot of people are working with me on different projects, and they're all seeing my presence in those projects. And it does mean sometimes getting your hands dirty, meaning actually getting into doing things. And occasionally I do get into trouble from micromanaging, and I have to be conscious of that. But, people will, let me put it this way. People say my biggest flaw as a leader is I try to do too much too quickly. In other words, that is my taking the superpower and taking it too far. And so, as we know, anything that you're good at, if you take it too far, becomes a weakness. And so I'm having to consciously sometimes not do quite so many things. But I do think the fact that I can juggle a lot of balls at the same time is helpful, because being a business school dean, as you've intimated, is complex, just in terms of all the different stakeholders that you're dealing with.
The other thing I'd observe, having worked with you in your previous business school, London Business School, I've seen your ability to continue to think in what you're doing. And I see a lot of leaders, frankly, are running a process or going through the motions, and your clarity of thought has shone through. And I think you're a generous person in terms of your spirit. You've answered my question on weakness. What about more philosophically? What is the impact you're looking to have on the world around you through your work and your endeavors?
Yeah, I mean, I wonder, because as an academic, as a single academic, you can make an impact through your publications and to some degree through your students, although you never really see the fruits of that, which is great. And I've done that. Running an institution means that I can actually help to make this institution as a whole bigger and better and better known. So for me, what would success look like is one way of answering it is, for the Ivey Business School to be a world recognized and reputable school to a much greater degree than it is today. So it is almost as simple as that. I want to make a difference to Ivey so that the Ivey brand becomes as big as it should be. And most people outside Canada don't really know Ivey. If you look at the alumni, if you look at the legacy of the school, it is the best business school in Canada. I think Rotman did a terrific job 20 years ago, of becoming very well known for its MBA. But if you actually, look across Canada and you ask people who are in positions of authority, more of them have Ivey MBAs and HBAs than Rotman by a long way. So Ivey's big in Canada. It's big because it takes its learning so seriously. And I just want that story to be better known around the world. It's almost as simple as that.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
And when you're having your best day,
yeah,
when everything's going brilliantly, you are multitasking, you're not doing too much, you are being patient as well, and you're doing things you enjoy. What's the fuel that powers the engine? What are the practices that help you just at a personal level that help you do that?
Gosh, I mean, I always take exercise every day. There you go. I mean, we have a swimming pool. I can literally see it from my office here. It's a 3-minute walk away, and sometimes it's running, and sometimes it's biking or whatever. And because obviously this all takes energy, and I do find, I mean, we all find that we have highs and lows in our day, but by taking exercise at lunchtime, I just completely recharges the batteries for the afternoon piece. So, I mean, that's just a personal discipline I've had
Right.
for 35, 40 years. I'm not sure I do anything else particularly differently than others would. I mean, I try to mix up my meetings just to give myself a range of different things. The meetings I come out from when I'm feeling pumped are very often the ones where, we're doing something novel, or I've just interviewed someone on a podcast and we've had a good conversation. A feeling that somehow what we're doing is inching us forward. You've heard of this famous concept of the progress principle. If I think that I am making progress on the things that matter to me, even if it's just an inch forward, then that energizes me.
I get it. I love how you stay continually curious, and you work hard, you put in the hours, but you do it in a very thoughtful way, and you are very clear. I mean, I hear this, and I work with many CEOs, have done for nearly 3 decades now, where the best are clear on what the questions they're trying to answer, clear on what they have, aware of the challenges, and then start doing the work bit by bit. And as you said, don't spend too much money too early. Just start experimenting. And I take my hat off for you doing that. If you were to give a final message to listeners going through some form of digital transformation, what would be the one message you'd like them to leave with from today?
Yeah, thank you. Good question. So you are, and we can do it in the context of generative AI because and agentic AI, because every business around the world is currently sort of saying to itself, how is this going to affect me? And it's not very simple advice, but it is, I think the right advice is do not allow the consultants to bamboozle you with the urgency or even the specificity of the solution, because we know that we're still in some ways in the early stages of the artificial intelligence revolution. We know that it affects every industry differently. And so maybe this is our Kodak moment sort of question that somebody throws at us to say, we've got to act decisively now, otherwise we're going to be swept away. Usually that is lazy thinking. And I do absolutely urge anybody to try to unpack the nature of the technological threat opportunity, if it's AI, fine, and to look at the specific circumstances of their business. What are the assets that they've got which are probably not going to be challenged, and to figure out for themselves the right way forward. And I just worry that it's so easy to fall into either the analogy of, we're facing our Kodak moment, or the allure of the consultant who tells you agentic AI is the next big thing, you've got to get into it now. I mean, I really am very, very averse to that sort of thinking.
Yeah.
So there you go.
Very wise.
That's my
very wise.
True advice, albeit not simple advice, is figure out what works for you.
Yeah. Think, pause, reflect, consult, and don't just lurch forward.
Right. There's a lot of analytical tools out there. I mean, some in my book, but others have come up with equally good ones to help you just to get to the bottom of things yourself.
Yeah, and I commend people to that. Where can people find out more about the book, you, Julian, yourself, and obviously Ivey online? Where should they go?
So the book obviously is now available in Europe. It's actually not available in North America for another couple of weeks, unfortunately. But it's published by Bloomsbury. But obviously, you can just buy it on Amazon. I've written a few other ongoing things in Harvard Business Review, Sloan Management Review on this topic. Ivey itself, I mean, ivey.ca is our website, and you can see our bold ambition on there.
And you're sharing some of the journey, obviously, on LinkedIn and other places which is great to hear about.
I have been opening up a little bit on LinkedIn.
That's great.
Anyone wants to find me there.
That's great. Do you know what great conversation? As always, you say a lot in not so many words, and you leave us with some ideas, some personal experiences, examples, frameworks that we can use, and you do it in a very engaging, thoughtful way. So very, very grateful for your time in such a busy schedule. And that was another edition of Lancefield on the Line. I do hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did. Please do check out the other episodes in this series. Sign up to the podcast, to the YouTube channel. Go on, give us a 5-star rating. And Julian, thank you ever so much again.
Thank you.